When cold seeps through stone walls, is it like water seeping through fabric? When every breath requires conscious effort? That a place where even sleeping has become a kind of endurance? How can families rest generation after generation? Tonight, we will float up to the lofty Himalayas and return to the era when Mount Everest had not yet become a world-famous name, when exploration and fame had not yet turned this mountain into a place beyond home. During these quiet times, we will explore how the Sher people, farmers, herdsmen, merchants and families have learned to sleep under conditions that seem impossible to most of us, where the oxygen content in the air is only half that at sea level, where winter nights are long, painful and ruthless. Before we embark on this quiet journey through the world's highest inhabited cold light, I would like to ask you for a small favor. If you click the like button and subscribe to Epic, Boring History, you will join us to learn more about late-night explorations of the forgotten corners of the past. Please leave a message below. Let me know where you are now and what time it is in your world. Some of you might be lost in the stillness of midnight. Some people have just started your day, while others are somewhere in between. Now perhaps dim the lights or turn on a gentle fan to emit a soft background hum. Let's review history together tonight. Imagine yourself standing at the edge of a small stone village at an altitude of 11 to 14,000 feet. The year might be 1880 or 1920. The exact date is not important. What matters is the pace of life. Over these centuries, the pace of life has hardly changed. And mountains surround you, just like the walls of the world, and the peaks disappear into the darkness and mist. The valley below vanished into the shadows, and the stars above multiplied in the thin atmosphere until the sky appeared brighter than darkness. This is the Khumbu region. Although it may be any one of several valleys, the Sherpa community has lived here for generations. The wind here has never really stopped. It only fluctuates between a steady pressure and a roaring force that prevents the conversation from proceeding. You can feel it now, can't you? The subtle lightness in your chest, that faint feeling of being out of breath, merely stems from the existence at this altitude. Your body is already working harder than it realizes. Faster. Your lungs pull deeper, trying to extract enough oxygen from the air, which is not as important to some extent. You know, the houses in the village are clustered together, as if seeking mutual protection from the wind and rain. Their stone walls are thick and low, and the roofs are piled high with stones to prevent them from being blown away by the strong winter wind. Smoke rose from several mountains and was almost invisible in the gradually darkening sky, carrying the smell of burning yak dung, which is the main fuel for the rare and precious trees here. Tonight, let's kill time here and slowly experience sleep in this impossible place. One will experience what it means for an ordinary person to face an ordinary night in a place that makes an ordinary existence extraordinary. Later on, we will follow the quiet youth of a special person who brought these nights into history. We will explore the mysteries and significance surrounding sleep in this culture. We will see how some people live in warmer environments than others, although no one has truly escaped the cold democracy of the mountains. But first, let's start with simple, difficult, and repetitive experiences. When the world itself seems not suitable for rest, yet we try to rest. The sun is now beginning to set behind the western mountain peak. Do you know what this means? At this height of the mountain, darkness does not spread. It dropped. When it drops, the temperature also drops. You stand outside your house. This is a building built with the help of your grandfather and maintained by your father through years of wind and rain. The wall is thick, with nearly 2 feet of stones carefully stacked, and the gaps filled with soil and smaller rocks. The entire thing is held together through joint efforts and continuous attention. The door is very low. Even when you go in, you have to lower your head a little. This is no shoddy craftsmanship. Its meticulous design keeps the opening small to prevent heat from escaping and wind from entering. There are various uses in the main room, such as cooking, eating, working, having parties, and sleeping on the coldest nights. The ground was made of sile, smoothed by the feet of several generations, and was covered with a mat woven from yak hair. Rough, durable and giving off the smell of the animal that provided it. The fireplace is located in the center, a recessed area where the stones have been blackened by years of fire. Above it, the ceiling is also black, covered with layer upon layer of soot, which has accumulated season after season. A thick residue actually served as insulation, sealing the tiny cracks and helping to retain the warmth provided by the fire. Your mother is preparing dinner. It's the last meal before the long night. Dry yak dung blocks were burning on the fire. They burned slowly and produced more smoke than heat, but this was the only fuel enough for you to get through the winter. The smoke had nowhere to go and could only pass through the stones on the roof, flowing out through the unsealed gaps. It is hung layer upon layer in the room. You have also learned to stay low and breathe the air close to the floor when the smoke is thick. Your eyes sometimes water, especially when the wind direction changes and pushes the cigarette down. Your throat has adapted, but tourists from low altitude areas often cough, while miners stop in homes like yours. This is a simple exchange. Smoke is irritating, but smoke also means warmth, and warmth means survival. You won't question it, just as you won't question the necessity of breathing. The meal tonight is very simple. Most dinners in the evening are very simple. Mix the roasted barley flour with butter tea to form a thick paste. Shape it with your fingers and take a small portion. This tea itself is salty and is made by stirring butter. Its hydrating effect is as much as its nourishing effect. At such a dry altitude, your body loses water with each breath, and butter tea replaces the water lost from the mountains. If the season is good, there might be some dried meat, or a thin bowl of potato and radish soup. These potatoes and radishes are all grown in the vegetable gardens that are barely cultivated on the terraced fields on the hillside. But tonight is ordinary, so tonight is ordinary. You eat very slowly, not out of courtesy but out of necessity. At this altitude, digestion requires more effort and more oxygen. Make you feel dizzy and nauseous. The conversation by the fireplace was very quiet. Your father mentioned yaks. Your brother said that a section of the wall needed to be repaired before the next storm came. Your mother loudly wants to know the situation of the barley reserves and whether they can last until spring. These concerns repeat day after day and season after season. Survival, maintenance, endurance. When the meal was finished and the wooden bowl was set aside, the fire was refilled once again. Your father placed several round stones along the edge of the coal, allowing them to absorb heat gradually, while the family completed their evening tasks. Outside, it was pitch-minus dark, and along with it came a kind of coldness that was hard to describe to those who had never experienced it. This is not just discomfort. It is very aggressive, looking for any exposed skin, any crevices in clothes, and any moment of inattention. The temperature may have already dropped to -20 degrees Celsius, and it will continue to decline as night falls. In the severe winter, the temperature can drop to -40 degrees Celsius or even lower. This coldness can cause a burning sensation when metals are touched, and ice crystals can also form on your beard or scarf. You go out briefly to see the animals. The yaks were kept in the stone fence beside the house. Their body temperature actually provides warmth for human living spaces through the shared walls. Breathing heavily. Their exhalation can be seen as huge steam clouds. Their thick fur protects them, but even they huddle together, instinctively understanding what you understand. Warmth comes from closeness. You can hear similar voices from other families. The low cries of the animals, the sound of the door, and the coughing of someone pierced through the cold air. The village at night is not silent, but very quiet. There, sound travels strangely in the thin atmosphere, sometimes clearly over long distances, and sometimes completely absorbed by the wind. Back in the room, your family is getting ready for sleep. This is not a quick process. This is a survival ritual that everyone is well aware of. First of all, a place to sleep must be prepared. In your home, this is a raised platform built against the wall, constructed by trunks placed on stone supports, possibly 1 foot above the ground, to provide something isolated from the cold soil below. The platform was covered with more thick yak hair mats, on which were blankets representing years of accumulated wealth. Most of them are woven from yak wool, which is very dense and heavy. They are rough on the skin but can absorb body heat. A few of them are made of woolen or slightly softer, reserved for children and the elderly who need a bit of comfort. Among them, the most precious one is a pattern woven from goat hair, which was a gift from a relative doing business on the border of Zhejiang. The heated stones were carefully wrapped in cloth and placed near the area where the feet rested. They won't stay warm for a long time, perhaps 1 or 2 hours. But these few hours are the difference between sleep and trembling wakefulness. We'll start to dress for the evening. This point is of vital importance. You sleep without taking off your clothes. You added something to the clothes you were already wearing. Outside the clothes you wear during the day, you put on a layer of wool, which becomes soft due to use. Then there is the felt vest. Then another woolen robe is fastened tightly to trap air between the layers. Your feet have already put on the wool socks hand-knitted by your grandmother and felt boots that you can wear all night. Your hands will be treated the same way. First, there are thin wool gloves, and then sheepskin gloves. Even your head should be wrapped up, and your ears should be covered low with a woolen hat. If the night is particularly bitter, you can cover your eyes with a scarf. Some nights, you breathe with a scarf, warming it up a little before the air enters your lungs. The family gathered on the sleeping platform, arranging themselves skillfully and efficiently. The youngest child slept in the middle, surrounded by the older ones, while the parents slept on the outside where the cold first hit. You sleep on one side of your brother and the other side of your sister, covering all of you with thick blankets. This arrangement has no privacy at all and no personal space. These concepts are all luxuries that the cold does not allow. The collective blanket is so heavy that it feels as if the weight is pressing on you. But this pressure is part of a popular insulation strategy. The fewer the gaps in the covering, the less heat there will be. Your father does the same action every night before going to bed. He prayed silently to the guardians of the house in the mountain, speak in a low voice that you can hardly hear. And mother adds her own prayers, and then the fire is stored overnight. It won't go out because it takes too much effort to start the fire from scratch in the morning, but will be reduced to a glowing embers that need to be carefully cared for when it first appears. Now it is a strange and difficult process of trying to sleep in extremely cold high-altitude areas. You sit on the platform, feeling your brother's shoulder resting on yours and your sister's breath approaching your face. The stone wrapped around your feet offers a warm island, and you are strongly aware that it will disappear. You can feel your body temperature gradually accumulate under the blanket, slowly, as the wool traps the air, and your metabolism generates heat over time in the thin oxygen environment. Sleep is not easy. Even if you're exhausted after a day of childbirth, the thin air can affect everything, including the brain's ability to regulate the sleep cycle. You dozed off in a daze and then suddenly woke up. Your heart rate slightly quickened, as if you needed to take a deep breath, but it couldn't fully fill your lungs. This is a kind of periodic breathing, which is very common in high-altitude areas. Your breathing becomes irregular during sleep, sometimes pausing for a long time, and then you take several deep breaths. This is not dangerous. Your body knows what it is doing. Even if your consciousness finds it shocking, it divides your rest into shallow cycles. You will sleep, but not deeply, not continuously. The cold never came from any direction protected by anyone or thick blankets. Your nose is exposed to the air and feels cold. Your breathing will form small pockets of moisture near your face, and this moisture will cool down immediately. If you change your position, you will encounter the cold area where the bedding has not yet warmed up, and then you will soon return to the area where your body heat has already taken effect. The warmth you create is precious. You won't waste your time on unnecessary movements. You can hear your family members breathing beside you. The same irregular pattern, the same slight, gnawing and sudden deeper breathing. You can hear the wind outside constantly pushing against the walls, finding the gaps around the door and whistling low, becoming part of the background every night. Sometimes you may hear yaks moving within their enclosures, or the barking of dogs on the other side of a distant village. Once you hear what might be the call of a snow leopard coming from a high rock, even though it is far away, it is just a faint sound of the wind. Your mind is in a strange, semi-minus awake state, which is regarded as sleep in high-minus altitude areas. You become aware of the discomfort in your body, the itching of the wool blanket, the slow pain in your fingers and toes, despite the layering, and the dryness in your throat and nose. But you also realize that memories and dreams are mixed together. The scenes of working during the day blend with past memories and stories told by others, just like the strange and vivid quality that dreams present in the thin air. Colors seem brighter. Events are more symbolic and emotionally intense, even if your body remains still and cold. You dream of working, of leading a yak up the mountain, of drawing water from a frozen stream, and of performing daily survival actions with your hands, but they are lasting. Your brain processes the repetitions that define your existence. A few hours later you woke up again, but you didn't know exactly how many times you had woken up. Darkness is complete. This room has no windows and the fire is almost gone. You heard your father move carefully, adding a small amount of fuel to the embers and coaxing them back to their dim lives. The faint light could illuminate nothing, but you knew he was there, on duty in the middle of the night, making it possible for the morning fire to be ignited. It's getting colder. You can sense it from the quality of the air. The moment your breath leaves your mouth, it's as if it's frozen. The stones at your feet have long turned cold, and your toes feel far away. Although they're a layer upon layer, they are almost numb. You carefully bend them in your boots, striving to maintain blood circulation without interfering with the heat accumulated in other parts of your body. This is the deepest part of the night. A few hours before dawn, the cold reaches its peak and sleep is the most elusive. You lie quietly, conserving your strength, patiently allowing time to pass like a mountain man, not fighting against discomfort, but simply enduring it in one breath. You will briefly recall summer, when the stone walls are slightly warm during the day and it's easier to fall asleep. But summer is still several months away, and such thoughts cannot bring warmth. So you just let go. Think of the elderly in the village. Some of them don't wake up in the morning after the coldest night, and their hearts stop beating in the darkness. This is acceptable and even expected. The mountain bears what it bears. All you can do is wake up gratefully when dawn comes. You fell into a deep sleep again. This time the dream was even stranger. You walk in the chest minus deep snow, but you feel warm, incredibly warm, with the sun shining brightly above your head. Even if you know it's night, you can still see figures in the distance. They might be ancestors, ghosts, or simply creations of the soul in the thin air and exhaustion. They keep going up, keep going up. You follow them because that's what you have to do here. You climb, you endure, you keep moving forward, even though rest seems impossible. When you wake up again, there is the faintest change in the darkness. To be precise, it is not light but a subtle change, indicating that dawn is approaching. Your father has already taken action. His figure is almost invisible because he is working on the fire, adding more fuel, gently blowing out embers, and coaxing the flames back to life. The fire was small at first, then grew larger and larger. Suddenly, the room became clear again. You can see the black walls, the hanging storage bags, and smoke starting to accumulate in the upper part of the room every day. Your mother moved a little, then your siblings, all of you, emerged from the collective warm blanket and stepped into the cold air. This transformation is cruel. The temperature under the blanket may differ from that of the indoor air by 30 degrees Celsius or more. You acted promptly. Instead of taking off your clothes, you put on your work uniform, ready to face the tasks of the day. Your fingers are stiff and your joints can't move after several hours of cold stillness. Outside, the village is gradually awakening. You can hear similar noises coming from the nearby houses. Some people are making a fire, some are taking care of the animals. After the long night, daily life returns to normal. Now the sky is flashing with lightning, changing from black to deep blue. The mountains around you are beginning to emerge from the darkness, huge and indifferent. Thank goodness the wind has calmed down a little. Some mornings it roars non-stop, even making simple tasks dangerous. You go out to break the ice on the ship, check on the animals, and start a cycle. From now on, 12 or 14 hours later, you'll once again fall into cold darkness and intermittent sleep. This is the patient pattern of your life. In this observation, there was no complaint and no self-pity. This is the meaning of living at this altitude and time. You sleep because you have to sleep, you sleep poorly because you have to sleep, and you wake up because no matter what, your body has found a way to endure. The night has passed, all the nights have passed, but you are still here, still breathing in the thin air, still facing the small struggles and quiet persistence of a new day. This is what it's like to survive on the roof of the world. Not glorious, not comfortable, just enduring one cold night after another, spanning time and generations. Tonight when night falls again, you will repeat this entire process because this is what you have been doing, your parents have been doing, their parents have been doing, until your people start to show up in these valleys. The mountains will never change. The cold won't abate, so you can only adapt, endure and persist in your own way. Now, let's set aside the collective experience of the night in Sherpa and focus on a special person. Taking a look at his early life, when the patterns of cold sleep and high-altitude endurance were already deeply engraved in his bones. His name was Tenzing Norgay. Although this name changed and evolved over time, he eventually became famous worldwide for standing at the highest point on Earth. But that moment of fame, that extraordinary achievement, came much later. What we are interested in tonight is not that. On the contrary, we should explore the quiet years. A person's formation is that he learns to sleep in the impossible cold because he has no choice. The endurance they cultivate is not through training programs or conscious efforts, but through living day after day in an environment that demands endurance from everyone. His year of birth is unknown. In these distant valleys, records are not carefully preserved, and the exact date is more important than the season and cycle. It was probably around 1914, perhaps a year or two earlier, in a place called Chachol in the Khumbu region, or perhaps in the village of Tenem a little further west. Even this geographical uncertainty is part of the story and part of the existence of mountain creatures within soft boundaries rather than precise lines. Like many families, his family members also moved along with the seasons, trade routes and places where they grazed. What matters is not the exact location, but the quality of the location. It was high and cold with only stone houses and thin air. Continuous mountain ranges occupy every horizon. He was born in a world where sleep meant coldness, where rest was always incomplete, and where the body learned from infancy to function with less oxygen than the human body needed for evolution. His family holds an average position in the social structure of their village. They weren't either rich merchants nor monks, but neither were the poorest. They have some yaks and some land, enough to survive but enough to make them live comfortably. His father, like all fathers, worked hard, managed the animals, maintained the fields and made deals whenever he got the chance. His mother, like all mothers, managed the household, managed the food reserves, prepared meals, and maintained the family's survival through careful resource management and continuous labor. It is very common to have many children at home. Many children are born and some die, because even in the best circumstances, childhood in the Himalayas is unstable. Tenzing is not the eldest, which means that since childhood, he has followed the patterns of his elder brothers and sisters, learning through observation and imitation, and gradually taking on responsibilities because he has proved his ability. His earliest memory, if we can find it, might not be a specific event, but a feeling. The cold feeling, the smell of yak dung smoke, the scent of butter tea, and the sound of the night wind blowing on the stone wall. These are all constants and the backdrop for everything else to happen. He would learn to sleep like all children, huddle on top of his siblings to keep warm, cover himself with thick blankets, and be often awakened at night by the sound of breathing and the wind. He was never very comfortable, but never expected to be. Sleep does not refresh one. This is just the state, bring breaks at work. The house itself is a living thing, breathing along with the family, in its own way, contracting in the cold and slightly expanding in any warmth that may arise. The walls were thick stones, plastered with mud that many people had mixed and smeared over the years. As the weather eroded, the joints ended again and again. The single room, which serves as a living, sleeping and working space, is dark even during the day, with only small windows, little light and little count. The ground was a smooth layer of soil worn by the feet of several generations, with woven mats laid on it, which could slightly insulate it from the cold. In a corner stands an altar. Although it is not large, it is well maintained with oil lamps, offering bowls and the guardian deity. For decades, the smoke from the yak dung fires blackened the ceilings and formed a layer of soot, which actually helped to separate the spaces. Although no one has ever thought so, this is just what happens when people burn fuel for heating year after year. The sleeping platform occupies most of a wall and is slightly higher than the ground to avoid the coldest weather on the ground. This platform's the center of nightlife. The entire family positions itself in a configuration that balances the distribution of warmth and available space. Children are the warmest in the middle, while adults are on the periphery. If necessary, they can stand up more easily. As he grew up, his responsibilities also increased in an orderly manner, just as everyone's childhood responsibilities increase. First, do some small things around the house, such as fetching water, taking care of the animals, and collecting fuel to make a fire. These are not occasional household chores but daily necessities. If they cannot be completed, it means the entire family will suffer. No concept childhood is a protected period, separated from the serious affairs of survival. Children are indispensable workers. The earlier they become capable, the better it is for everyone. Water must be drawn from streams or springs and transported in heavy containers. With each step, the water becomes heavier and heavier. In winter, this means breaking the ice first, sometimes chiseling through the frozen surface with stones until water flows out. During this process, your hands will become numb. Then, while you are carrying things home, warm your body with your hands. Yaks need constant care. They need to be transferred to different grazing areas, protected from predators, milked at the appropriate time, and their feces collected as fuel. These animals are a combination of wealth and survival. Even if one is lost due to an accident or illness, it will be a serious blow to the future of this family. Collecting fuel is an endless job that takes several hours every day. People had to collect yak dung from fields and pastures, make it into cakes, dry it in any sunny place, and then store it carefully for several months to prevent it from drying out. At such an altitude, wood is scarce, with only short shrubs and occasionally twisted trees. Each piece was carefully cut and taken home. As long as it can be avoided, the fire will never go out completely. Restarting is very difficult and consumes precious resources. So there is always someone responsible for maintaining at least the embers and feeding them regularly at night. He might spend the night in the same layout we have already explored, a family sleeping platform, a collective blanket, and fragmented breaks that come with altitude. However, children adapt to these environments more easily than adults. For him, this is quite normal. His body is learning at the cellular level to produce more red blood cells in order to extract oxygen from the thin air more effectively, so as to function in an environment that would make Lowell and people breathless and dizzy. This is not a conscious skill. This is biological adaptation. The body will respond to the environment after years of exposure. This adaptation occurs in both visible and invisible ways. His chest took on a bob-shaped characteristic of residence in high-altitude areas, expanding to accommodate the lungs that worked harder with each breath. His cardiovascular system underwent self-reorganization, with changes in the heart and blood vessels to transport oxygen-deficient blood more effectively. Even his metabolism changed, learning to obtain the maximum energy from limited food and function during the characteristic of winter life minus the long period of fasting. The cold is also shaping him. His circulatory system is learning to maintain good temperature. Even when his limbs are numb, he prioritizes vital organs of the fingers and toes. In such cases, most people are at risk of hypothermia. In winter, going out on some nights, even for a short time, means pain. Breathing freezes immediately and exposed skin gets frostbitten within minutes. He learned to respect the cold, be well-prepared, act efficiently and try to minimize the time he was exposed to it. He knew the subtle signs of severe cold danger, the way his fingers stopped hurting when frostbite began, the drowsiness when body temperature was low, and the importance of staying active even when he was too tired to rest. These lessons are not imparted in words but are absorbed through observation, through observing how adults prepare for exposure, and through the occasional tragedy of someone misjudging the power of cold. In the village where he spent all these years, only the narrow path through the mountain pass connected to the broader world. In winter, when snow blocks all tree routes, roads can become impassable for several months. This seasonal isolation is complete. When winter comes, the village turns inland and relies entirely on stored food, preserved fuel and immediately available resources. Those winters are the most difficult times for sleep. When the cold reaches its peak and the food supply decreases, everyone goes to bed a little hungry to conserve calories and keep the reserves going until spring. It is especially difficult to sleep on an empty stomach in extremely cold conditions. The body needs energy to generate heat. If there is not enough food, it is difficult to produce heat. The hunger of the deep winter has always been with him. It is not acute hunger caused by hunger, but chronic malnutrition resulting from rationing. As the reserves are exhausted, food becomes less and less, and the frequency also decreases. The body has also adapted to this, learning to reduce consumption, slow down metabolism and preserve energy. But on cold nights, without enough internal fuel to maintain a comfortable warmth, one will feel this price. During this period, sleep becomes lighter and is interrupted more frequently as the body strives to balance various competing demands. Dreams exhibit a food-centered quality. The exquisite feast that appears during sleep vanishes into the reality of thin porridge or light tea upon waking. Tenzing should have known these winters like the back of his hand. He should have experienced how hunger intensified the cold, how it made sleep more elusive, and how it turned waking up in the morning into a slow and painful process, forcing his stiff limbs to move. There is no heroism in this. It's just the pain that everyone endures in silence, which is part of the annual cycle. The arrival of spring almost has religious significance, not only because of the renewed warmth, but also because of the new food. The first batch of fresh vegetables, the return of trade routes, allowed for new supplies, and animals began to produce more milk. These mark a transformation from endurance to relative affluence, and from survival to true living. This change is not sudden but gradual. A slow sting, matching the snow retreating from the high mountain pass. As the amount of food increased, sleep gradually improved. As the desperate edge of winter hunger gradually faded away and his body rebuilt the reserves depleted by months of cold deprivation, the spiritual aspect of his growth was inseparable from his daily life. His family, like most Sherpa families, adheres to Tibetan Buddhism, emphasizing compassion, impermanence and the interconnection of all things. There is a small monastery, or at least a shrine in the village. Throughout the year, there are ceremonies, festivals and rituals that mark the passage of time and strengthen the connection of the community. Before going to bed, they would do some shortened practiced prayers, which naturally integrated into their evening routine as if they were making a fire. These prayers are neither complicated nor lengthy, but their purpose transcends the spiritual level. They created a rhythm for the night, a psychological boundary between day and night, a moment of acknowledging the power beyond human control. The mountain god, the guardian deity, is a huge yet indifferent force in nature. Prayers are often whispered in the dark. Simple incantations are skillfully repeated. The words themselves are not as important as the act of these words. At night they created a boundary of sound, a human voice briefly imposed on the vast, silent and cold mountains. For children growing up in such an environment, these prayers are as common as breathing, a part of existence, rather than something separate or special, and not separated. You pray for protection and you also install stones around the door to block the wind. Under the same survival framework, Both of these actions are meaningful. Festivals embellish the year and provide structure for time, otherwise they might blur into undifferentiated seasons. During these celebrations, despite the scarcity of supplies, the entire community still prepared special food. Despite exhaustion, there was still music and dance, creating truly happy moments in this rare life. Sleep patterns change. People go to bed later and gather together in ways that are impossible in normal work, sharing stories and songs that carry the knowledge and humor accumulated over generations. On these nights, the burden of survival has been slightly alleviated. When humanity is no longer merely about endurance, and when cold, altitude and constant work gradually become the backdrop, communities emerge. As Tenzing enters its teenage years, the weight of expectations increases. He is no longer a child in need of protection, but a young man who needs to make significant contributions to the survival of his family and eventually build his own family. This transformation brought him new pressure and also made him realize the limitations of his family's economic situation. They have sufficient living conditions, but not enough to offer a more comfortable life, which might be less arduous, less persistent cold, and less uncertain about the future. He began to hear stories from the world beyond the valley, from merchants who crossed the border of Zizang, from officials who passed by here occasionally, and from rumors and news clips that knew very little about the big world. There is a place called India in the south. It has a vast territory, a warm climate, rarely snows and abundant food. These stories depict a world that is almost unimaginable to those who only know mountain life, a world that is not often cold, a world where food grows easily, and a world where the air is thick and breathing is effortless. These stories have the qualities of fairy tales. They are so wonderful that it's hard to fully believe them, but they contain sufficient specific details to hint at some of the truths behind the fantasies. Some strange foreigners came to try to climb the peak. They brought unusual equipment and special motives, and paid porters and guides to help them cross the mountains. These adventure activities are intriguing, but they also represent a possibility, a way to make money, and to see things beyond the narrow rural life. Foreigners themselves are charming and strange. They have pale faces that turn red in the sun, speak languages they can't understand, look both rich and helpless, and can afford sophisticated equipment that without the help of Sherpa, they can't work in the mountains. That came with maps and instruments, plans and ambitions, and an impulse to reach a peak of no practical value. For the villagers, this obsession with mountain climbing is perplexing but also very useful. If foreigners are willing to pay to endure the pain at high altitudes, then Sherpas have had such painful experiences throughout their lives. The job of carrying goods for the expedition team was very hard, but no harder than the ordinary work in rural life. Moreover, its remuneration was real currency, not just survival. Tenzin began to cultivate a quiet aspiration, which at first did not take shape clearly but was merely a vague feeling that apart from the endless cold nights and self-sufficient agriculture, there might be something else and another way of life. This is not an exclusion of his culture or family. For a young person, it is understandable to find a path that might be slightly more than what he knows. His opportunity, like many young Sherman people, came through being a porter. The expedition team needed someone to carry the goods and help set up the camp to withstand the cold and high altitude, which made most outsiders feel calmed. For Sherpas, this job is quite challenging, but not particularly so. They are merely earning their wages through their lifelong adaptation to altitude and cold. For Tenzin, this meant leaving home for a while and going to a place like Darjeeling, where an expedition team was organized to sleep in different postures under different conditions. The journey to Darjeeling itself is an agitation, descending from the familiar upper world to a realm where the air becomes thicker, the vegetation more lush, and the temperature rises to an almost oppressive level after a lifetime of coldness. This transformation is not entirely comfortable. His body adapted to the high-altitude environment, struggling somewhat in the excessive oxygen and the warmth that should have brought him joy, but he felt heavy and strange. The population density of Darjeeling is simply incredible. There are more people in one place than he has ever seen in his entire life. Buildings are piled up together with sounds, smells and constant activities. The organization of the expedition team was carried out in such chaos. Climbers arrived from Europe, equipment was unpacked and inspected, and porters were hired and organized into teams. Those early adventure nights were a kind of education for them. These tents are very thin and are designed for portability rather than for warmth. The heat they provide is far less than that of a family sleeping platform. He slept in layers of clothes, just as before. But the blankets nowadays are different. They are lighter and less effective. They are distributed by the organizers of the expedition team, who do not fully understand the cold. Sometimes he shared a tent with other porters. They huddled together like family, sharing body temperature because they had no choice. The tent is made of candyson treated with wax or rubber to be waterproof, but it has almost no insulation. They kept flapping their wings in the mountain wind, the fabric crackling sound, making it harder for people to fall asleep than usual. Breathing forms condensation water indoors. When someone moves, the condensation water will freeze into frost, adding another layer of cold discomfort to an already poor environment. The floor of a tent is usually just a bed sheet, a thin barrier spread between the sleeper and the frozen ground, almost unable to insulate against the severe cold on Earth. At other times, he slept in camps at extremely high altitudes where the air was very thin. Every movement required conscious effort, and his sleep became more scattered and difficult than usual. He lay awake, unable to fall asleep, listening to the irregular breathing of the other porters, hearing periodic pauses and sudden gasps, which are signs of sleep at high altitudes. At these extreme camps at an altitude of 20,000 feet, the physical struggle becomes even more pronounced. Periodic breathing is very common. The rhythm of breathing becomes irregular, and the pause in breathing may last for several seconds before the body suddenly gasps for breath. This pattern sounds disturbing. What's worse, your breathing follows the same irregular pattern. Everyone in the tent is struggling for enough oxygen. At such an altitude, headaches occur frequently. This dull stress will never completely disappear, and dehydration and cold will make the situation worse. The cold in these camps is bone-minus chilling. Even more so than the nights in most villages, as they are more exposed to ridges or glaciers, without stone walls for protection, without stone roofs covered with thick soot, and without fire at night. In the morning, frost often forms in the tent and the sleeping bag is covered with ice formed by exhaled breath. Waking up in these high camps is a cruel process. The cold hardened everything. The sleeping bag froze into a stiff shape. The boots have turned into ice cubes and need to melt before they can be worn. My fingers are too numb to do some simple things, such as tying shoelaces or QQ. The moment you just step out of the sleeping bag is the worst. The body's carefully stored heat is drowned out by the surrounding cold, and every movement requires conscious willpower. In cold and oxygen-minus deficient conditions, getting dressed at extreme altitudes could be a torment and may take an hour. Every simple action, such as putting on socks and buttoning up a jacket, requires rest and conscious effort. He knew he could endure all this. His childhood had fully prepared him for these conditions. What seemed impossible to foreigners was merely a difficulty to him. This is not pride but an observation, an awareness. He has been training for this kind of work all his life, although no one has intended to do so. His ability contrasts sharply with that of foreign mountaineers, which is very educational. He saw those who were regarded as strong in their own country struggling with the heavy burden of daily porters. He saw the climbers feel dizzy and nauseous at the height, where he only felt uncomfortable. He noticed that they were making meticulous preparations for the cold every day. Between the two expeditions he returned home and once again slept in the familiar family stone house. Finding himself caught between two worlds, one was the traditional rural life pattern, and the other was something much larger, something that might offer opportunities, although it was risky. This tension was not dramatic, but it persisted. A quiet discomfort even accompanied him to sleep. He realized that leaving home to work meant losing a pair of hands for daily chores at home. He realized that the money he earned was of vital importance, but also that it came at the expense of the traditional rural life structure. Money itself is rather strange. Metal coins and paper money represent value, but they cannot be eaten or burned because they only make sense in the context of trading the market. In the village, wealth means animals and land, as well as things with direct utility. In the world of exploration, wealth is an abstract form of currency that can be exchanged for anything or nothing depending on the circumstances. He sent money home as much as he couldn't watch it turn into something his family needed. Food supplies to replenish their reserves, house repairs, and perhaps new clothes or new tools. The tangible improvement of the family environment proved that this work was worthwhile, making the cold nights spent in the thin tent worthwhile and giving meaning to this discomfort. He increasingly realized that he was good at high-altitude carrying work. He had an extraordinary ability under extreme conditions. His ordinariness in the village made him extraordinary in the context of mountain climbing and exploration. His awareness influenced the rest of his life. But in the first few years, it was just beginning to take shape, just beginning to suggest possibilities that he couldn't fully imagine yet. He rose to fame in the expedition team. Mountaineers remember those outstanding porters who can carry difficult things with peace of mind and still play a role when others struggle. Names are passed between exploration, advice and warning, assessing who is reliable and capable. Tenzing's name began to appear in these conversations, and he was regarded as a person worth hiring, someone capable at handling high-altitude work without complaint or failure. During this period, his nights were divided into two kinds of coldness. One is the familiar coldness of home, with a fixed pattern and the warmth of family, and the other is the new coldness of the adventure camp, lonely, harsh, and filled with foreign voices. Both taught him, shaped him, cultivated his patience, and eventually lead him to the top of the world. But this achievement will still take several years to be realized, and its specific details are still hard to imagine. Even though every cold night, every intermittent sleep, every morning when the fingers are stiff, in the thin air, forcing the body to move, work, and continue, all are preparing for it. This mountain patiently and ruthlessly taught him, just as it had taught his generations, through repetition, through discomfort, through the simple fact of continuing to survive in an environment that did not care whether he lived or not. During this period of time, his dreams, as he still remembered, were a mixture of two worlds. He dreamed of carrying an impossible mission on his back, moving along an endless path, sleeping in places that alternated between the tent and home, and sleeping in the cold that was both familiar and strange. These dreams possess the vivid symbolic nature commonly found in high-altitude regions, where the brain struggles with limited oxygen to create exceptionally intense images. Sometimes he dreams of warmth in places he has never been to. These are all derived from stories and imagination rather than memories. These were all pleasant dreams, but also disturbing, because waking up from them and entering the reality of a cold mountain morning felt like a small betrayal, reminding him that nothing's wrong. But more often than not, his dreams are merely an extension of his daily life. Carrying, climbing, and managing animals minus these repetitive actions define survival in high-altitude areas. Even during sleep, his brain is rehearsing survival, processing the endless small decisions that enable a person to survive in a constantly challenging environment. Dreams sometimes have a prophetic nature, not in any mysterious sense, but in the way the subconscious processes patterns and possibilities. Before walking on the tree roots, he dreamed of the tree roots before the tree roots reached them. He dreamed of the changes in the weather before lifting heavy objects. He dreamed of the weight and balance of the heavy objects. These are not supernatural illusions but the natural outcome of accumulating experience during sleep. The brain organizes information to prepare for future challenges. Some dreams seem to predict reality, which merely proves how deep his understanding of the mountainous environment is and how thoroughly his experiences have trained his intuition. As time went by, he took on more exploration work, and the balance of his life gradually shifted from rural life to a new identity minus a high-altitude worker. His body continued to adapt, developing an extraordinary ability to operate in thin air and severe cold on the basis laid in his childhood. His ability to sleep in such circumstances, or more precisely, his capacity to get sufficient rest when lacking sleep, has become part of his professional value. The leader of the expedition team noticed that while European mountaineers struggled through painful nights and woke up exhausted, Sherpas like Tenzing seemed to manage to keep functioning, working day after day even in extreme conditions with little sleep. What they failed to fully understand was that this was not a superhuman ability, but merely a normal adaptability throughout human life. Like everyone else, Tenzing slept poorly at high altitudes, but he slept poorly all his life. His body and mind had learned how to function. Intermittent sleep is not strange to him. This is the function of sleep. Cold is not an enemy to be defeated, but an eternal companion to be managed. The thin air was not an obstacle but merely air, the only kind of air he truly knew well. He unconsciously formulated the strategy. Even in limited quantities, small habits can maximize the quantity of rest. He knows how to adjust his body to reduce the time exposed to the cold, how to use the existing materials for insulation, and how to relax in discomfort rather than struggle against it. He understood that worrying about not being able to sleep would only make sleep more elusive. Accepting the current situation is more productive than being depressed. These are not from books or teachers' courses, but organic knowledge gained through thousands of hard nights. This gradual transformation from rural farmers to mountain workers has no clear boundaries and no dramatic decision-making moments. It is more like water flowing downhill, along the path of least resistance, determined by the environment and available opportunities. He led the village knights to every expedition camp, carrying with him the memory of sleeping on his brothers and sisters, the scorching stones at his feet, and the memory of his mother praying quietly before making a fire. These memories did not offer warmth, but they provided a backdrop and a framework for him to understand that what he was experiencing now was difficult but not unprecedented, cold but not unique. Even though the time spent outside has increased, the connection with home remains very close. During the peaceful moments of his exploration, he thought of his family, wondered about the changes of the seasons in the village, and imagined that without him, the familiar daily life would still go on. This connection will not weaken because of distance. Instead, it will become even closer and more conscious in parting. Home is not only a real place he wants to return to, but also an idealized memory that supports him through difficult times. On the nights of exploration, when other porters were sleeping or trying to fall asleep, he would sometimes recall his own life journey, thinking of how the nights of his childhood had gradually led to the nights on the flanks of the world's highest mountains. This makes sense. A line connects the stone houses of Khumbu and the canvas tents of Mount Everest. This line is endurance. Learn to persevere night after night when you are cold, uncomfortable and lack rest. In these thoughts he didn't think he was anything special. Everyone he knows has the same ability. If the environment leads them in this direction, everyone in their village can do what they are doing. What sets him apart is not his extraordinary ability, but the unique life path he has taken, the special opportunities he has encountered, and the choices he has made leaving home and seeking a job in an emerging industry that requires people who can sleep at a height where most people cannot survive. However, the foundation of all this was his early years, countless cold nights during his childhood and youth, where his body and mind learned the basic lessons that none training program could teach him. How to rest without comfort, how to sleep without warmth, and how to wake up and continue working when every body signal indicates a stop. His exploration work exposed him to different mountaineering cultures and various mountaineering methods. The British expedition was characterized by military precision, hierarchical structure and meticulous planning. Rock climbers from Germany and Austria have brought about different feelings. Their climbing styles tend to be more aggressive and they are more willing to take risks. When Americans came, they had their own unique way, being more individualistic and less bound by tradition. He learned to adapt to these different styles and understand what each expedition team leader values in order to provide the most useful support. This flexibility has transformed into another skill, another form of adaptation, this time not physically but socially and professionally. The ability to understand people and situations and make corresponding adjustments. The mountains themselves taught him with a consistency that transcended cultural differences. The wind teaches us the same truth, no matter who is experiencing it. The cold demands that everyone show the same respect. Altitude imposes the same restrictions on everyone's body. This mountain is the ultimate coach, fair and ruthless. Every night spent at high altitudes is another lesson on what it means to be human in an environment that hardly tolerates human existence. These experiences have accumulated layer by layer, accumulating rich experience, which will prove to be invaluable in the coming years. The harm this job causes to the body is real and cumulative. Each adventure made his body a little tired, and the high altitude inevitably brought him more harm. Frostbite scars accumulate on fingers and toes, and small tissue losses cannot regenerate. Year after year, his lungs bore an invisible burden, breathing in the thin cold air, and he developed the chronic disease that plagued workers at high altitudes. But he went on to say, out of necessity and because I increasingly realize that although this job is very difficult, in a world where opportunities for people like him are scarce, it represents an opportunity. Those cold nights are the price paid for the opportunity to engage. There's something more important than self-minus sufficient agriculture and for the possibility of having a future different from the past. During the breaks of adventure in the off-minus season, the pace of life slows down. This is the time for recovery, the time to reconnect with families and villages, and the time to participate in agricultural work, which remains the pillar of the lives of the Sherpa people. Even though the exploration work has become more important, the sleep during this period is different, longer, deeper and more conducive to physical recovery. His body uses this rest time to repair the accumulated damage and rebuild the reserves that have been exhausted by months of extreme exercise. However, even in these peaceful days, his dreams were still filled with mountains, endless transportation, cold camps and thin air. This job has become a part of his identity and he can't put it down even during his breaks. As the exploration work has brought money and for an influence to this area, the village itself is undergoing slow but obvious changes. The traditional model still exists, but has been modified by new possibilities. The purchased goods complement local production. Occasional appearances of Western and traditional clothing, fragments of English and other languages are mixed with clear language. He is part of this transformation, one of the media through which the outside world enters the isolated valley. This character is very complex, but also destruction. Money, but there are also new dependencies. Having come into contact with broader possibilities, but also realizing what this village lacks. The other porters working with him became a second community, a group of shared experiences that transcended individual villages. They understand each other in ways that others cannot comprehend, share knowledge and strategies, and take care of each other in the dangerous work of high-altitude transportation. These relationships were forged by squeezing into inappropriate tents at night, by helping each other in the morning, by putting frozen boots on frozen feet, and by the bond between those who often risked their lives for meager wages and deeply felt it. In such circumstances, the trust established is deeply rooted. This trust is not built on words but on the basis of repeatedly proven reliability under extreme conditions. His understanding of the mountains deepened with each expedition. And with every night spent on the plateau, the knowledge he accumulated also increased. He learned to interpret the weather, the nature of light, the behavior of clouds, and the feeling of wind through subtle signs. These skills determined both safe and fatal decisions. He understood the mood of the mountains. Some peaks seemed to reject climbers, while others allowed them to climb. A pattern that may be attributed to objective danger, or perhaps something less tangible, a quality that resists scientific explanation, but still requires respect. This kind of knowledge is not mysterious but very practical. This understanding stems from the continuous exposure and attention over the years. On a night at an extreme altitude, he realized his limit, which was something that ordinary life could never achieve. He discovered an endurance reservoir he had never known about before and found that he could still work for a long time even after he thought he was completely exhausted. He also learned the true signs of linnets' continuous efforts become dangerous rather than heroic, and wisdom means stopping rather than moving forward. His ability to distinguish between temporary discomfort and actual danger may be the most valuable of all skills. It kept the experienced mountaineers alive, while the eager but ignorant ones perished. Cold became his close companion, and his understanding of it transcended conscious cognition. His body knows the cold, knows its progressive stages, knows the boundary between controllable discomfort and serious danger. This knowledge was written into his nerves and blood, into his body's automatic response to a drop in body temperature, into the unconscious adjustment of metabolism and circulation, enabling him to maintain core functions even when his limbs were in pain. Every cold night contributes to this kind of education. The chill every morning deepens these lessons. As his fame grew, he was selected to participate in more prestigious expeditions, and the risks also increased, but his basic experiences remained unchanged. Whether it's transporting items for a small reconnaissance mission or participating in a major summit attempt, the night is always very cold. It's always difficult to sleep. Morning always brings me the same challenge, forcing my tired body to move. The difference does not lie in the conditions, but in the significance of the conditions. Some expeditions attract people's attention and resources, while others remain unknown. He learned that this mountain did not care about the differences among these humans. Cold and altitude treated both famous mountaineers and nameless porters equally. The accumulation of experience itself is a kind of wealth. Although it is not as tangible as the money he earns, it might be more valuable. In his body and mind, he received a comprehensive education and understood what it meant to be human at the edge of possibility, in the area where life was almost impossible to sustain. This kind of education has no formal courses, no certificates or diplomas, but its rigor and thoroughness are hard for traditional education to achieve. Each lesson must be tested immediately and thoroughly, and the results cannot be postponed or avoided. The knights went on to say that each one had added one data point after another to their own life experiment. Some nights are worse than others. Those at extreme altitudes, those in storms, and those who are injured or ill, adding to the painful baseline of cold and thin air. Some evenings are a little better. The air at the lower camp was a bit thicker, and the calm weather reduced the chill. Exhausted, although uncomfortable, I still fell asleep. But they all possess the basic quality of endurance, continuing to survive in conditions unsuitable for human habitation and obtaining rest when there are few conditions. At this stage of his life, he is still unfolding and the direction is still unclear. He rose to fame in the small circle of Himalayan mountaineering, renowned for his reliability and strength. However, it will still take several years for his great achievement to make his name known all over the world. What he has now is a thorough and comprehensive preparation that has been written into his bones and blood after years of living and sleeping in the cold. When opportunities come, such preparation is indispensable. When opportunities arrive, try something that requires every ounce of accumulated endurance and skill. But that moment is still in the future and cannot be seen from this favorable position. These nights, these cold awakenings, these mornings when stiff muscles and numb fingers were forced to move, these days of carrying heavy objects on steep paths, these nights of pitching tents on another bare ridge, and these nights of intermittent sleep in the thin air and bone-minus chilling cold. This pattern persists, ruthlessly yet malleable, shaping him into a person capable of accomplishing what most people consider impossible. Through simple repetition, it prepares him to face challenges he has yet to imagine. The mountain was very patient with its teachings, willing to repeat the same lessons night after night and year after year until they were fully absorbed. He proved through conscious intention that he was a focused student. But through a simple fact, he continued to show up, continued to endure, continued to sleep, wake up and work in an environment that was fundamentally detrimental to human life, night after night, night after night. As night falls, we delve further into this quiet exploration, allowing us to distance ourselves from our personal lives and head towards a broader mystery, surrounding sleep within the culture of snow. The dimension of resting in the mountains transcends the purely physical meaning and experience, making the simple act of closing one's eyes more complex and more integrated into the structure of spiritual and community life. Sherpas and other Himalayan people do not simply view the night as the absence of the day, as a blank period during the event. The night has its own qualities and its own existence. Sleep is understood as the time when the boundary between the material world and the spiritual world becomes permeated. When protective attention is necessary, when dreams carry meanings that daytime thoughts do not have. This understanding determines the way houses are built, the way evening ceremonies are carried out, and how people explain the strange experience of sleeping at extreme altitudes. Let's explore these relatively quiet mysteries, these questions without definite answers. In these spaces, archaeology, anthropology, and life experience are intertwined and hard to categorize, yet they are extremely fascinating. First, consider the building itself. The design of the sleeping space involves more considerations than the actual situation. We had explored its physical structure, fixed stone walls, small doors, and sleeping platforms rising from the ground. But these ruins also have a kind of mental geography. It is not placed randomly. It occupies a sacred central position and its maintenance is ritualized. Fire represents continuity, warmth, and life itself. Letting it go out completely is considered very inauspicious and may bring harmful effects into the home. Around the sleeping area, family members place protective items, such as small stones engraved with sacred syllables, strips of cloth printed with prayers, statues of deities or tall lamas. These are not decorative. Their mental function is to create a protective boundary around the fragile sleeping body. The understanding is that during sleep, consciousness relaxes its control over the body. In this relaxation, negative forces may enter the soul, negative energy from the wilderness and mountainous areas, and the restless attention of entities residing in uninhabited places. Therefore, protection is hierarchical. Physical walls and mental boundaries work together. Some families have small shrines in the rooms where their family members sleep. When resources permit, butter lamps stay on all night. The flashing lights have multiple uses. It offers a small amount of warmth, provides psychological comfort in the darkness, and continues to be worshipped to the God who guards the family. This kind of light can also help those who wake up lost at night to determine their direction, just like a small anchor point in the darkness. In high-altitude areas, sleep is fragmented, and consciousness drifts between wakefulness and dreaming. This direction is more important than it seems. The positioning of these protective elements within the room follows a pattern that is neither random nor strictly prescribed, but rather stems from a collective understanding of how space should be organized over the centuries. Corners are regarded as particularly vulnerable areas where negative energy may accumulate or linger. Therefore, protective symbols are often placed near these angular junctions. The threshold itself, that is, the entrance for people to enter and exit, is regarded as a crucial boundary and needs to have its own protective form, usually marked with painted symbols or blessing items to prevent unnecessary intrusion. In these high-altitude residences, the windows are small and deliberately placed not only to retain heat, but also to limit the access that harmful effects may enter during the fragile night. Some families hang prayer flags or blessing cloths on the windows before going to bed, creating an additional barrier on a spiritual level rather than a physical one. These practices reflect a worldview in which the night view outside is not empty but inhabited, filled with existence that need to be recognized and appropriately bounded. The stones used in architecture are sometimes not only considered for the integrity of the structure. Some rocks, especially those with unusual colors or patterns, are believed to have protective properties, and builders deliberately place them on the walls close to the sleeping area. Knowledge about which stones carry which properties has been passed down from generation to generation, which is part of an oral tradition that combines practical architectural knowledge with spiritual understanding. Now let's take a look at one of the most interesting aspects of sleeping at high altitudes: the essence of dreams. Sherpas and others who have long lived above 10,000 feet have reported for a long time that the quality of dreaming at high altitudes is different from that at low altitudes. They usually have more vivid colors and details that seem impossible to be bright, remaining clear even after waking up. They are more symbolic, filled with images that carry weight and meaning, climbing endless stairs, encountering talking animals, and seeing the mysterious guidance provided by deceased loved ones. Modern sleep science has discovered the biological causes of this phenomenon. In high-altitude areas, the brain receives less oxygen, which can affect the way the brain processes information during sleep and may lead to stronger dream images and better dream memories. Periodic breathing that occurs during high-altitude sleep, that is, the moments when breathing pauses and then resumes, can cause fluctuations in oxygen levels, which may lead to unusual dream states. At moments when oxygen levels are reduced, the brain may produce more vivid images as it strives to maintain its normal functions. But for the Sherpas, these scientific explanations were meaningless, and their own explanations were equally valid within the framework of their understanding. Vivid dreams are messages, warnings and guidance from the spiritual realm, which are more accessible at high altitudes, where the material world itself seems less real. Dreaming of a snow leopard may indicate the presence of a protective deity or a warning of danger. Dreaming of flying at high altitudes may indicate mental progress or the need to transcend current limitations. The appearance of a deceased family member in a dream is understood as not merely a memory, but an actual visit. The deceased took advantage of the permeable boundaries created by sleep at high altitudes. These visits require translation, discussions with family members, and sometimes with religious experts who understand the symbolic language of the dream world. There are still some dreams that everyone regards as warnings. Dreaming of falling, dreaming of being unable to breathe, dreaming of getting lost in the snow with nowhere to hide. These are not symbolic but rather signals sent by the body itself, indicating that something is wrong and altitude sickness or frostbite is developing. Even without medical terms to describe it, the relationship between physical pain and dream imagery is implicitly understood. People who dream of suffocation may have suffered from high-altitude pulmonary edema, the fluid accumulation in the lungs hindering breathing. People who dream of their limbs being frozen may have already suffered frostbite, and the distress signals sent by the nerves are manifested in the form of dreams. The collective experience of the community tells people to pay attention to this information and take action upon waking up if a specific dream theme emerges. Interpreting dreams is not a casual matter, but involves careful attention to details and context, as well as certain individuals in the community who are considered to have special insights into the meaning of dreams. When dreams seem particularly significant or disturbing, these interpreters are usually elders or mentally trained individuals. Conversations about the interpretation of dreams have strengthened the connection within the community and created opportunities to discuss fear, hope, and the mysterious workings of the physical and spiritual realms. Dreams are sometimes shared collectively, especially when they seem to carry information related to the entire village, rather than just one dreamer. A dream about an upcoming storm or avalanche, the location of a lost animal, or the appropriate time for a trip might be discussed among neighbors and incorporated into collective decision-making. This sharing of dream knowledge creates a distributed consciousness in which the nighttime experiences of many individuals contribute to a larger pool of wisdom guiding the behavior of the group. Children are taught from a young age to remember and report their dreams in order to identify which types of dreams require immediate attention and which are just normal processing of daily experiences by the brain. This training of dream awareness creates a group of people who are highly adapted to the subtle signals provided by their bodies and minds during sleep. The ability to distinguish dream symbols has become a survival skill, as practical as knowing how to interpret weather signals or track animals on the snow. There is another phenomenon that modern mountaineers call plateau illusion. It is not entirely a dream, but a waking illusion that occurs in a hazy state between sleep and full consciousness. People report seeing human figures, hearing sounds and feeling an existence that cannot be explained by physical reality in the dark. Sherpas generally do not view these experiences as pure hallucinations, that is, the products of false perceptions produced by an oxygen-deficient brain. On the contrary, they understand them as encounters with the true souls and entities living in the mountains. In a certain sense, this mountain itself is regarded as living, inhabited by creatures that exist beyond the normal human perception. The weakening of consciousness that comes with high-altitude sleep merely offers a glimpse into what has always been there. Whether these creatures are beneficial or harmful varies from person to person. Some people are the guardians of the mountains and they have a favorable impression of those who show appropriate respect. The others were neutral, merely present and not particularly interested in human affairs. Lynch does not refresh dangerous entities. If not properly comforted, they may lead travelers astray, cause illness, or bring misfortune. This understanding influences people's behavior during sleep. Pray, place protective items, and carefully maintain a respectful attitude towards the mountainous environment. Sleep is not merely physical vulnerability. It is also mentally fragile and requires conscious attention to protection and propriety. The boundary between illusion and true spiritual encounter did not occupy Sherpa's mind as Western scientific thinking did. Objectively speaking, the question of whether an experience is real is not as important as what it means and what kind of response it requires. If you see a figure in the dark and feel the need to pray or offer a sacrifice, you will do so, regardless of whether the figure is a ghost and illusion or some kind of hard minus to minus categorized combination. This pragmatic approach to unusual perceptual experiences implies that people in high-altitude areas had developed a psychological flexibility, the ability to navigate a state of consciousness that is neither fully awake nor fully asleep without experiencing pain. In high-altitude areas, it is normal for people to accept strange experiences, which creates the cultural framework that prevents fear and anxiety. Otherwise, this feeling might accompany such fear and anxiety. People no longer struggle with these experiences or are intimidated by them, but learn to coexist with them, regarding them as information rather than threats. Now let's turn to what archaeology can tell us about how the ancients in these regions managed their sleep. Although we must admit that the archaeological record is incomplete, the stone buildings survived, but the organic materials, blankets, mats and clothes that could tell us most about sleep arrangements altered rapidly in the harsh mountainous environment. What remains are the framework of the house, the patterns of the fireplace, and the positions of the walls and platforms. Archaeologists working in high-altitude areas have discovered patterns that have been very consistent for centuries. The sleeping platform rises from the ground, with a central fireplace and thick walls facing to minimize wind exposure. The excavation of these ancient fireplaces has revealed layer upon layer of ashes and smoke. Each layer represents countless flames and countless nights. Families gather around the warmth and then disperse into their cold sleep. Chemical analysis of soot can tell us what is being burned. It is mainly made of yak dung, but juniper can also be used. There are also traces of fragrance, and it is used as a material for evening ceremonies. Around these fireplaces, archaeologists sometimes discover some small ritual items: carved stones, fragments of yellow oil lamps, and prayer flags. These items tell us the spiritual aspect of nightlife and confirm that the practices observed in modern times have profound historical roots. In some excavated sites, especially those that are seasonally occupied, the construction of sleeping platforms shows interesting variations. Some have built hollow spaces underground, possibly filled with hay or other insulating materials, creating an air gap between the cold ground and the sleeping surface. This indicates a complex understanding of the principle of heat preservation. Knowledge has developed through the experiments and observations of several generations. The methods used by the people who built these buildings were not primitive. They are highly adaptable experts at surviving in extreme environments. Archaeological records also reveal that over time, the construction of sleeping spaces has shown a continuous and gradually innovative pattern. The early structures showed simpler designs, while the later ones included improvements, indicating the accumulation of the best knowledge. In some areas, the wall thickness gradually increases. The height of the sleeping platform was adjusted and the position of the fireplace was improved to maximize heat distribution while minimizing smoke accumulation. These changes occurred slowly over several generations. Every improvement represents countless nights of life experience, telling us where we can do better. Some sites show evidence of experimental architectural techniques that were clearly attempted and then abandoned, indicating that not all innovations succeeded. An unusually high sleeping platform, an unreasonable fireplace design, and a wall configuration that causes problematic air currents. These failed experiments left traces, reminding us that the successful sleep arrangements we later saw were achieved through repeated trials. Those who developed these technologies paid the price of cold nights and poor sleep in the process of researching which ones worked and which ones didn't. One of the most mysterious aspects of high-altitude archaeology is the temporary camps, which are seasonal shelters used by herders when they migrate between valleys or move their animals to higher pastures during the summer grazing season. These campsites have few traces, sometimes just stone circles that once fixed the tent walls, and sometimes small rock walls used to shield from the wind. Archaeological evidence indicates that these camps were repeatedly used over a long period of time, choosing the same locations time and again, possibly because they offered specific advantages. Stay away from the wind, be close to water sources, and have a good view of the surrounding terrain to ensure safety. But almost nothing can tell us exactly how people sleep in these exposed places. From later practicing the logic of survival, we can infer that they would crowd together, use every available animal skin and woven blanket, light some small fires, and be carefully taken care of all night long. But the specific details were lost, leaving us with an alluring blank in the story. This absence has a nearly poetic feeling. The countless nights, millions of hours of cold sleep and fragmented rest that humans spent in these highlands left almost no trace. This experience is real, one that real people have strongly gone through, but it has vanished into silence, leaving only stones and ashes as witnesses. Some sites show evidence of intentional abandonment, leaving ritual deposits where offerings were placed in fireplaces and items buried at thresholds before they were finally allowed to cool. All these indicate that leaving a home, even if it is only temporary, requires spiritual recognition, acknowledging that this space is important and the nights spent there are significant. The ritual aspect of giving up sleeping space reveals some profound relationships between people and the places where they sleep. These are not merely functional shelters, but spaces where consciousness resides in its most vulnerable moments. Spaces for dreams, spaces where children are born and the elderly die, and spaces where countless intimate moments unfold in the darkness. Leaving such a space without recognition makes one feel something is amiss, which is an infringement upon the relationship that has been established between people and the place over many years or generations. The offerings left in the abandoned fireplace are usually simple butter, barley flour, perhaps a prayer scarf or a small carved stone. These items are to express gratitude to the protective forces that safeguarded the family during their stay and to ensure that this space remains beneficial for those who might use it in the future. The act of making these contributions turns giving up into an appropriate departure, bringing an end to one chapter and leaving room for the beginning of a new one. Now let's consider the social and cultural aspects of sleep. Nighttime rest is a community practice rather than a personal experience. We have explored how families sleep together out of practical needs, but this physical intimacy has a broader impact on social structure and emotional life that essentially does not exist. Everyone knows how others sleep, who snores, who has nightmares, who plays around in their sleep, and who lies still. This intimate knowledge creates a different kind of social bond. You know people's weaknesses, their unconscious selves, which never show up in their daytime interactions. When children grow up, they understand that their parents are just bodies. They are also struggling with the cold and discomfort, and are confronted with the challenges that everyone faces. This sense of lack of privacy extends to the sound. On a quiet night in the deep mountains, the sound spreads among the households. You can hear the coughing of your neighbors, their bedtime conversations, the crying of children or the sounds of being comforted. The village at night is noisy. Every family contributes to the common acoustic environment. This creates a common consciousness, that is, as part of something larger than an individual's family. If the neighbor's voice suddenly stops on a cold night, people will notice. In the morning, someone will check to make sure there is no illness or accident. This informal sound monitoring system helps protect vulnerable individuals, the elderly, patients, and anyone who might need assistance at night. The collectivity of sleep can also affect emotional development. Children know very early on that their discomfort is not unique. Everyone is struggling with the cold and lack of rest. Endurance is common, not individual. This might have contributed to the emotional resilience of the Sherpas, who can accept difficulties without complaint or regret and remain calm under difficult conditions. If everyone you know is facing the same challenges, these challenges will become normal rather than abnormal. The sounds of the village at night create a sound map, and the residents have learned to read it very subtly. You can identify a specific family by the pattern of coughing, the tone of a child's crying, and the rhythm of movement when a family falls asleep. This kind of knowledge is not consciously sought but naturally absorbed through years of listening, becoming part of the intuitive consciousness that guides community life. When unusual sounds disrupt the normal night mode, this kind of sound perception allows for quick responses. A sudden cry of pain, quarreling sounds beyond the normal range. The strange silence might indicate that someone has fallen. Those who hear these disturbances immediately notice them and can call for or offer appropriate assistance. The thin walls in the mountains and the spread of sound mean that no family is truly isolated. If there is an urgent need, they can always get help. Sleep arrangements also have an interesting gender dimension. In most families, women and men sleep in the same place and children are interspersed among themselves. However, there are also subtle positional hierarchies. Whoever sleeps closest to the residual heat of the fire, whose blanket is slightly better, occupies a more protected position on the sleeping table. Generally speaking, children and the elderly occupy the best positions, while middle-aged adults take up more exposed positions. This is not a hard and fast rule but stems from a consensus among people on who is most prone to catching a cold. However, there are exceptions depending on who does the job with the highest physical demands. If a father has to get up before dawn for a long journey, he may get a better sleeping position the night before and rest as much as possible. A mother who has just given birth will be placed in the warmer spot, surrounded by family members whose body temperature is helping her recover. Through silent negotiations and a shared concern for collective survival, these adjustments proceeded smoothly. In winter, when food is scarce and it's cold, the most intense sleep arrangements sometimes extend to individual families. Large families may gather in fewer houses, leading some empty ones to concentrate body heat and resources more effectively. This winter rectification is temporary. Everyone regards it as a practical action rather than a social comment. Spring has come and the situation has eased. Every household will return to their own home, but the memories of those winter nights spent together have strengthened the connection among the related families. Negotiations around sleeping positions, although often silent, are complex social interactions that reveal many family dynamics and values. By observing these negotiations, children have learned the unspoken rules of managing collective life, how to assess the needs of others, how to make sacrifices without seeming like martyrs, and how to accept help without losing their dignity. The lessons learned in the intimate context of getting ready for sleep shape social behavior that goes far beyond the sleep platform and extends to all aspects of community life. These arrangements also have seasonal variations, reflecting constantly changing conditions and needs. In autumn, which is the hardest season, when everyone is exhausted from long hours of work, sleep arrangements prioritize recovery, and those who work the hardest get the best positions. In spring, when supply is low and energy is needed for planting and renewal, pregnant and lactating mothers are given priority to ensure that the community continues to the next generation. It is also the time to tell stories before going to bed at night, which is one of the most important cultural customs in the Sherpa society. During the long period after the last meal and before going to bed, family members will tell stories, myths, legends, tales of ancestors, strange events and unusual experiences. These stories have multiple uses. They educate children on correct behavior, reinforce cultural values, provide entertainment during dark times, and help them transition to sleep easily. The pace of storytelling, the calm voice, the familiar narrative pattern, and the gentle repetition of stories that everyone has heard create a soothing atmosphere, making the cold prospect of sleep slightly less intimidating. Many stories deliberately use secular structures and repetitive phrases to induce sleepiness, just like oral lullabies. There are stories specially arranged for winter nights. These stories acknowledge the hardships of this season and also convince people that spring will eventually return, the cold is not permanent, and patience has meaning on purpose. These seasonal stories help to place the current hardships within a larger time frame. There are also some stories that directly touch upon sleep and dreams, telling tales of people dreaming about the future, stories of people encountering ghosts in their sleep and receiving warnings or blessings, and stories of people traveling to distant places in their dreams and returning with knowledge. These stories confirm the significance of dream life and reinforce a cultural understanding that sleep is not merely the unconscious. The art of storytelling itself is a skill passed down from generation to generation. Some people are regarded as particularly talented narrators whose stories can more effectively attract attention and generate stronger emotional responses. These skilled storytellers understand rhythm, know how to adjust their voices to match the emotional content of the story, and know when to pause to achieve the desired effect and when to move forward to maintain tension. Their performances a few hours before bedtime are something people look forward to, especially during the long and dark winter when entertainment options are limited. Stories are also containers of cultural memory, preserving knowledge about landscapes, past events, and lessons learned through sometimes tragic experiences. The story of a traveler who ignored warning signals, then lost his life in a storm contains some practical information, such as predicting the weather, the danger of overconfidence, and the importance of respecting the mountainous environment. Children who have heard such stories absorb this knowledge without being treated as formal education, learning through the stories what they need to survive in the harsh world. Some families also hold evening prayers collectively. It is not merely the brief personal prayer we mentioned earlier, but a longer prayer in which mantras are recited, protective visualizations are carried out, and requests for safe passage through the night are made to various deities. These practices create boundaries of sound and time, marking the transition from day to night and from activity to rest. The use of butter lamps in these evening ceremonies is both practical and symbolic. The warm light flickered on the stone wall, creating familiar and comfortable dense shadows. The smell of burning butter, sometimes mixed with incense, is psychologically associated with night and sleep, creating a triggering mechanism that helps the brain transition to a resting state. Even on the coldest and toughest nights, these familiar sensory cues can offer some comfort. Collective prayer usually follows a set pattern, and the responses and repetitions of each family member are memorized. Participate in something greater than oneself. In the common spiritual practice, the combination of such voices creates a sense of security and connection, which helps to combat the isolation and vulnerability that darkness and cold may bring. For children, the voices of adults reciting familiar prayers are a deep comfort. It is a signal that although that night represents mystery and danger, the world remains orderly and understandable. The timing of these prayers is not random but in harmony with the natural rhythm of the family's evening routine. After the last task was completed, after the door was closed, and after everyone had arranged their sleeping positions, they came. This time creates a clear boundary between the active day and the fragile night, giving everyone time to mentally prepare for the transition to sleep. Let's also consider the mysterious role of sound when getting ready for sleep. In a place where silence is often profound, the existing voice has the significance of amplification. The wind, always present, creates a background of sound, and people learn to read. Its pitch and intensity convey information about the weather conditions, indicating whether the night will worsen or stabilize. Experienced listeners can distinguish different types of winds and predict what will happen in the next few hours. The sounds of animals preparing for the night, yaks moving their enclosures, dogs adjusting their positions, and occasional bleating or purring. These sounds are reassuring signs that the protective ring around the home remains intact. The silence of the animals is worrying and implies something wrong. Inside the house, one can hear the sound of fire, the crackling and hissing sounds of burning feces, and occasionally the louder crackling sound of a piece of fuel moving. These sounds mark the existence of warmth and life. When the fire was stored overnight, these sounds weakened, and their disappearance itself became part of the night sound landscape. Then there are human voices, breathing sounds, snoring, the rustling of blankets, and occasionally noises made when someone is dreaming or changing positions. This sounds from a sound cocoon, reminding you that you are not alone in the dark and cold. Especially for children, the sound of their parents breathing beside them brings them deep comfort, making them convinced that there are adults present and keeping them vigilant to ensure everyone's safety. The existence of this sound may be as important as the warmth of the body, making sleep possible. The development of this acoustic literacy begins in infancy and lasts throughout one's life, becoming increasingly complex with age and experience. Young children first learn to distinguish between familiar sounds and unfamiliar ones, and know the difference between the night rhythm of their own home and that of their neighbors. As they grew up, they learned to explain more subtle changes. When the air is dry, the sound of the wind is different from that of wet wind. The special nature of animal sounds indicates satisfaction and pain. Adults have developed the ability to sleep in familiar sounds while remaining vigilant against unusual ones, a selective form of attention that allows for rest while maintaining necessary vigilance. This ability is crucial for survival. It ensures that real threats, such as the approach of predators, the sound of falling rocks, and the special nature of the wind before avalanche, can be recorded even during sleep and immediately awakened. Here lies a mystery that archaeology and anthropology can record, but can never fully explain. How exactly does consciousness adapt to these conditions over several generations? What kind of psychological mechanism has been developed that makes people regard intermittent, uncomfortable sleep as normal? How does the human brain learn to get sufficient rest night after night, year after year, throughout its life under inappropriate conditions? The answer lies at the intersection of biology, culture, and individual adaptation. But there is still a part of them that remains unknown and is part of the greater mystery of human adaptability. We know it happened. The evidence is irrefutable. In high-altitude areas where sleeping is theoretically impossible, prosperous communities have existed for centuries. However, knowing its occurrence is different from fully understanding the feelings, costs, compensations, and adjustments to which they occur. These compensations and adjustments are too subtle to be captured in historical records or archaeological data. Perhaps at most we can say that human beings have extraordinary adaptability. Consciousness itself is much more flexible than we usually think. What seems impossible from the outside becomes very normal when it is the only available reality. The Sherpas do not consider their sleep to be heroic or extraordinary. That's just sleep. Just what you do when night falls and the cold deepens. Adaptation to sleep at high altitudes may involve multiple levels of changes, such as the physiological adjustment of how the body processes oxygen, the real adaptation to sleep structure, psychological shifts in expectations and attitudes towards rest, and cultural frameworks that support these adaptations through ritual stories and shared practices. Each layer influences each other, forming a complex system that reinforces each other, making sustainable living possible in high-altitude areas. Consider the physiological aspect. After several generations of evolution, the body has adapted to operate more effectively in low-oxygen environments, developing greater lung capacity, more efficient oxygen transport systems, and metabolic processes that are more suitable for altitude conditions. These adaptations do not occur consciously or rapidly, but rather through a slow process of natural selection. The survival and reproduction success rates of individuals that are more suitable for altitude are slightly higher. On a neurological level, the brain's sleep regulation system must also adapt. Learn to consolidate rest more effectively during fragmented sleep periods. When a complete normal sleep cycle fails to extract more recovery value from less ideal conditions, prioritize the most important types of sleep. Similarly, these adaptations occur under conscious awareness and are the result of countless nights of stress, choosing systems that fully function in challenging environments. Compared with pure biological factors, psychological adaptation may be more rapid and more influenced by cultural dissemination. Children who grow up in such an environment learn to expect sleep from their earliest experiences. Never assume that sleep should be comfortable, undisturbed, or easy. The benchmark for their normal rest was established under conditions that seemed intolerable to people in low-altitude areas, so they never felt sleep-deprived or had problems. The cultural framework that supports these adaptations is crucial, but it is often underestimated when discussing survival at high altitudes. The story about sleep, the ritual of rest, and the collective understanding that everyone faces the same challenges. These create a psychological container that makes difficult conditions bearable. When your entire community agrees that sleeping at high altitudes is difficult for everyone, such intermittent breaks are normal. What you experience is common, not unique. The psychological burden of poor sleep quality will be greatly alleviated. There are also practical coping strategies and cultural knowledge, and they are disseminated through observation and guidance. Understanding certain sleeping positions is beneficial for breathing. When waking up due to a lack of air, one can consciously adopt specific breathing patterns. Nighttime movements and changes in posture are normal and acceptable, rather than signs of unease. This knowledge helps people deal with high-altitude sleep more effectively. A sleep duration has also adapted to the altitude conditions, but perhaps not very obviously. Rather than expecting 8 consecutive hours of sleep, cultural norms recognize that resting at high altitudes will be divided by multiple awakens and a semi-conscious state throughout the night. This kind of understanding eliminates the anxiety that may accompany the split, enabling people to fall back asleep after waking up instead of lying in bed dejectedly due to the inability to rest continuously. When the environment and workload permit, taking a nap during the day is regarded as a reasonable way to rest rather than a sign of laziness or weakness. This flexibility, in terms of sleep duration and pattern, enables people to accumulate sufficient rest throughout the daytime cycle, even if they do not get enough sleep at night. The cultural acceptance of this adaptive sleep pattern eliminates any stigma that might be associated with unconventional rest schedules. In this calm acceptance, in this lack of drama or self-congratulation, there is something profound in human nature. Our ability to normalize abnormal things, to establish an orderly life in abnormal circumstances, to find small comforts in great difficulties, and to pass on this knowledge from generation to generation, that is conscious teaching, but as living experiences that have endured thousands of cold nights, starting from infancy and continuing throughout our entire lives. The dissemination of this knowledge is carried out through what anthropologists call concrete learning. Knowledge is not acquired through explicit guidance but through repeated physical experiences until it becomes both automatic and unconscious. A child sleeps on his mother's back, learning through his body how to arrange himself to get the greatest warmth, how to match the breathing rhythm of others, how to change positions while not fully awake, how to distinguish between serious discomfort that requires action and minor discomfort that can be ignored. This concrete knowledge extends to countless small skills and consciousness that support survival at night. By feeling, I know to store blankets and extra clothes in a completely dark place. Fire can be stored just by touching. Learn how to move carefully in a crowded sleeping space without disturbing others. Identify whether the cold has become dangerous or still bearable through subtle sensory cues. None of these skills have been formally taught. However, everyone who grows up in such an environment possesses this ability, acquired through years of life practice. Intergenerational transmission also includes emotional modeling. Children observe how adults cope with difficult nights, how they remain calm in the face of discomfort, and how they support each other without complaining or expecting praise. This pattern shapes the emotional response to difficulties and creates a flexible pattern that operates at a deep psychological level through conscious thinking or deliberate effort. When lack of sleep is an inevitable part of life on the plateau and when it foretells real danger that needs to be dealt with. The wisdom of when to endure and when to take action has also been passed down. This kind of discrimination is crucial and subtle, requiring attention to a variety of signals from the body, the environment, and the behavior of others. People who sleep intermittently but regularly may just be experiencing normal plateau sleep. People whose breathing becomes increasingly difficult or who seem unable to fully wake up may have life-threatening conditions and require immediate attention. The collective nature of sleep arrangements means that this monitoring is carried out collectively rather than individually. If someone's condition seems to be worsening, many people will notice that the decision on whether intervention is needed comes from collective observation rather than individual judgment. This scattered vigilance makes night survival stronger and less dependent on the consciousness or expertise of any one person. As we approach the conclusion of this exploration, we found ourselves confronted with a fundamental mystery, which remains at the core of all discussions about high-altitude sleep. It's completely impossible for it to work. From any reasonable perspective, it is impossible to sustain life at such a height. The combination of cold and oxygen deficiency is too severe for the human organism to cope with in the long term. However, its occurrence and continuation are not as a temporary emergency measure, but as a continuous normal life for several generations. Archaeological records, though fragmented, document the existence of humans at extreme altitudes, dating back thousands of years, suggesting that this unlikely adaptation was not recent but ancient. In some place in ancient times, groups of humans migrated to these mountainous areas and settled down. After several centuries of development, the adaptation of biology and culture made permanent residence possible. The reasons for this migration may be diverse. The pressure from more hospitable lowland competing groups, the appeal of available resources in high-altitude areas, and the spiritual or cultural motivation that we can no longer rebuild. No matter what attracts people to this height, the sleep conditions they encounter seem impossible to endure for a long time. The first few generations may have experienced the severity of sleep deprivation. It is almost unimaginable that night after night of lack of sleep could affect all aspects of the body's functions. However, they persisted. Their children somehow adapted a little better, their children's children, and even better, until what had barely survived became quite normal. The story of high-altitude sleep is ultimately a tale of humanity's extraordinary malleability. Our ability to adapt to extreme environments seems to exceed that of our species. This story is not written in grand narratives or heroic achievements, but in quiet patience, in the accumulation of countless cold nights, in acceptance without drama or complaints, and in the process of passing on adaptive knowledge through the life experiences of several generations rather than formal teaching. It reminds us that on this planet, human lifestyles are astonishingly diverse. A comfortable and undisturbed sleep in a warm and safe environment seems indispensable to us, but most people in history have failed to achieve this. Sherpasin people in other high-altitude areas have developed a different relationship with sleep, which has been shaped into a form that functions properly even in inappropriate circumstances, maintaining life, culture and community, even under conditions that seem incompatible with human prosperity. When we conclude this exploration, we may reflect on what this history has taught us about resilience, adaptability, and the ability of humanity to survive in seemingly impossible places. The answer is not simplified to a single explanation, rather, it exists in the complex interaction among biology, culture, environment, and personal experience. It remains clear that human adaptability is much stronger than we usually realize. This awareness and culture can shape biology. When it is the only available life, what seems impossible from the outside can become very normal. As we delve into tonight's exploration, now let's turn our attention to a quieter fact about the Sherpa society. Not everyone experiences a cold night in exactly the same way. Although this mountain imposes harsh democracy on everyone, demanding that everyone adapt and endure, there are different levels of comfort and warmth, and the ways the rich and the powerful face the same darkness and cold that challenge others also vary. This is not a story of extreme wealth and extreme poverty. These terms do not apply to urban centers or agricultural societies with severe class division. The differences are more subtle, more in degree rather than absolute. But they are real and have a profound impact on those who have experienced them. They shape social relationships. And even when dawn breaks and everyone faces similar challenges, such relationships will persist. Let's explore these levels with the same calm attention, just as we study other aspects of mountain sleep. At the top of the Sherpa's social structure lies the monastic community, when monks and nuns devote their entire lives to religious practice and research, especially the Sherpasendurance, who hold a spiritual authority status. These individuals occupy unique spaces in the social landscape, neither materially rich nor poor, but possessing something more valuable than wealth, institutional support and collective resources. The monastery itself is an architectural expression of the community resources accumulated over several generations. The walls of these buildings are thicker than those of ordinary residences, usually supported by stone and multi-story. The upper floors are sleeping areas, and heat may rise from the lower rooms. These buildings represent the refinement of high-altitude architecture over the centuries. By the standards of the lowlands, the monks' dormitories were still very simple and crude. Small cells or shared dormitories, with the smallest furniture, have no traditional luxury items. But they have better insulation, are built more carefully, and are maintained by public labor to ensure that the walls are sealed and the roofs are intact. Many monasteries have central conference halls with large fireplaces where monks gather for evening prayers. When dozens of corpses fill a space and a fire burns for a long time at night, the shared warmth may be substantial. After that, the monks return to the cold dormitory to sleep, but they did so to absorb heat, at least to help them get through the early part of the night. Although the diet in a monastery is simple and often meager, it is more reliable than that in many families. A regular diet means that the body has a better ability to produce heat. In winter, when some families reduce food consumption to extend supplies, monasteries usually maintain a more consistent feeding schedule through collective storage and community donations. Some monasteries have better blankets, which are woven thicker, and occasionally receive donations from wealthy patrons, sometimes including textiles from trade networks and across China. These blankets are public property, not personal property, but they offer better insulation than many individual families can afford. Monks also have other factors that affect sleep quality. Compared with farmers and herdsmen, physical labor is reduced. Although monastic life has its own rigor, long hours of prayer, ritual obligations and learning requirements, it does not include exhausting physical labor such as managing animals, carrying water and maintaining terraced fields in thin air. This means that monks usually expend less physical energy when sleeping, which helps them get a slightly better rest. Despite the cold weather and high altitude, mental exercises themselves, meditation techniques, breathing exercises, and visualization exercises will also provide psychological tools for managing discomfort and achieving more effective rest. Archaeological and historical evidence indicates that some larger monasteries developed complex heating strategies. In winter, the sleeping area may share walls with the kitchen or the space where animals are kept, using the heat from these sources to slightly warm up the sleeping area. Some temples have built hollow spaces beneath the platforms where people can place the warm ashes from the fireplace before going to bed, providing gentle heat that radiates upwards throughout the night. None of these are complex heating systems, but they represent considerable creativity and collective effort in addressing the issue of cold sleep. Also very important, the monks sleep in sacred buildings, surrounded by sacred objects and prayers and rituals accumulated over centuries. For believers, in fact, everyone in this society is a believer to some extent. This mental protection offers psychological comfort and eases the transition to sleep. You know that you are sleeping in a protected space, guarded by protective deities. The spiritual power of countless prayers creates a sense of security, helping you fight against the anxiety that may arise from the cold and darkness. This is not superstition divorced from practical considerations. It is integrated into the same framework that values thick walls and high-quality blankets. below the elite class of monks but above ordinary farmers were trading families, which accumulated resources by successfully participating in the salt and wool trade route connecting Iran with Nepal and the lowlands of India. These families were not nobles in any feudal sense. The Sherpa people have no hereditary nobility, but they are wealthier, and this wealth translates into better sleep conditions. A successful trading family may have a larger house with multiple rooms, allowing them to reserve one space specifically for winter sleeping, and one room can be more carefully sealed and maintained instead of being used as a multi-purpose space. This specialization leads to better insulation and more comfortable sleep arrangements. They can afford thicker and higher quality blankets. Not only yak wool, but also finer wool, sometimes even mountain wool from Zazan, is woven more densely to retain heat more effectively. They might each have several layers of blankets instead of sharing a thick one as in poor families. Their fuel supply is more abundant, and they have stored a large amount of yak dung. Sometimes they can even find dry juniper wood from lower valleys, which burns hotter and produces less smoke than using cow dung alone. This means that their fire at night can be larger, last longer, warm the room more thoroughly before going to bed, and provide more residual heat at night. The heated stones placed in the sleeping area are larger and more numerous. Sometimes merchant families have specially made stone containers which retain heat more effectively than ordinary stones. These containers will be heated over fire, then wrapped in cloth and strategically placed in the sleep arrangement to provide concentrated warmth for the core area. Families engaged in trade also have easier access to imported goods. Occasionally there are textiles from China or India, metal brazing that can keep coal through the night, and even rare luxury items such as higher quality, more nutritious and warmer tea. That clothes might be in better condition, changed more frequently, and provide more effective insulation. The social status of these families also means that during the coldest winter, they can sometimes gather relatives in a larger house to provide warmth for the extended family, while also strengthening their own social networks and obligations. This is not pure altruism. This is part of the complex network of reciprocal obligations that make up Sherpa society, but it means that more people sleep more comfortably under the protection of wealthy families. However, we must be careful not to exaggerate such comfort. Even the wealthiest merchants still sleep in stone houses at extremely high altitudes, still facing the thin air and bone-chilling cold that everyone is confronted with. When their children woke up on the coldest morning, their blankets were still covered with frost. They were still experiencing intermittent sleep at high altitudes, and still knew what it meant to be frozen in the long winter nights. The change in comfort is real, but not significant. No warm rooms, better food, no abundance, larger houses, no mansions. Another category worth noting is caravan owners and expedition organizers, who emerged in the early 20th century along with the development of commercial mountaineering. These people occupy an interesting position. They are not the traditional elites, but have become wealthy because they have associated shepherds with Western expeditions. They often sleep in complex environments. Part of the year is spent in their hometown in a traditional setting. Part is in an expedition camp or a place like Doling where they organize logistics, and part is in the mountains, under the most extreme conditions. This different experience gave them a unique perspective on various sleep conditions. After returning home, they can afford the same improvements that trading families enjoy. More fuel, bigger houses. But they also carried exploration equipment with them. Occasionally a Western-style sleeping bag would enter the private domain. Canvas tarpaulin can serve as a complement to traditional roofs. Metal cookware is more efficient in heating than clay vessels. These mixed accommodations reflect their social status between the traditional mountaineering culture and the new mountaineering economy. Their sleeping habits also incorporate the Western equipment used in traditional stone houses. After the evening prayer comes the logistical plan for the upcoming expedition. Their children were exposed to different methods of treating mountain cold during their growth. Seeing both the ancestral methods and the introduced technologies, one should learn to attach importance to both. As mountaineering becomes increasingly important in the regional economy, This cross-cultural knowledge would eventually spread more widely in the Sherpa community. Landowners represent another relatively comfortable class. These families control the best farmlands, the most productive wheat fields, and the main pastures for yaks. In the Sherpa society, land was the traditional form of wealth. Those who controlled more land had more reliable food sources and more animals. More animals mean more fuel. The output of yak manure is roughly proportional to the size of the livestock herd. Therefore, wealthy families with a large number of livestock have more to burn. This also means that more yak hair can be used to make blankets, more butter can be used to make nutritional products and lamp oil, and more trading power can be used to purchase other goods. These families can keep larger fires burning until night and heat more stones as sleeping platforms, usually creating a warmer sleeping environment. The difference may only be a few degrees Celsius, but at extreme altitudes and temperatures, these few degrees Celsius could mean the difference between poor sleep and merely uncomfortable sleep. Their houses are also more likely to be well maintained, with timely repairs, regular checks for cracks in the walls, and roofs kept in good condition. This is not merely because they have more resources, although this is helpful, but because they have more available labor force, members of a large family, and sometimes even hired workers to help maintain family life, mean that problems can be solved before they become serious. The gaps in the walls that might allow cold air to enter in winter to be sealed immediately instead of waiting until spring, because someone can do this job. Now let's consider the other end of the spectrum. Although we must handle this issue with caution because even the poorest Sherpa families have community support, thus avoiding absolute poverty. There are still some families that struggle more than others, facing tougher choices and colder nights. The poorest families, those without livestock, perhaps led by widows or elderly couples without adult children, are facing the winter with the least resources. Their fuel supply is less than strictly rationed, which means there is very little fire at night and it is stored very early to preserve feces for cooking the next day. Fewer and older. Some parts of the wall have been worn thin and patched up, but they can no longer provide the best insulation effect. Their houses might be smaller or in worse condition. Over time, cracks appeared on the walls, and due to a lack of labor or materials, they could not be properly repaired. They eat less, especially when they store the least at the end of winter, which reduces their body's ability to generate heat. Their sleep might be the most fragmented, uncomfortable and least restorative in the community. However, even here, we must note that these families have not been abandoned. The social structure of Sherpa contains a strong expectation of mutual assistance. Wealthy families share fuel and food. Community prayers include requests for the protection of vulnerable groups. There is indeed pressure in society against anyone being subjected to extreme deprivation. The poorest families still sleep cold, but they are not alone in their struggle. Someone would always come to visit them. Some people will share resources. Someone will make sure they survive until the situation improves. This collective safety net reflects the Buddhist value of compassion and the practical understanding that in harsh circumstances, everyone's survival depends on maintaining community cohesion. A comfortable gradient does exist, but it operates within the minimum acceptable conditions that the community enforces through informal means. Within a family, there are also levels of warmth. The elderly usually sleep in the best positions, closest to the fire, with the people around them sleeping on the thickest blankets. This respect for age is both a cultural value and a practical understanding that the bodies of the elderly generate less heat and are more vulnerable to the effects of cold. Similarly, young children are also protected, placed in the warmest places and under surveillance throughout the night. People expect middle-aged adults to endure more discomfort, adopt an exposed posture, and sacrifice their comfort for vulnerable groups. This did not arouse people's aversion but was regarded as the correct order. Things should be like this. Gender patterns are not as obvious as in many societies. Both men and women work very hard and it is equally cold at night. Although sometimes the conditions faced by those who worked away from home during trade expeditions or early mountaineering jobs were even worse than those experienced by their families together. Their nights in temporary shelters or exploration camps are often colder and lonelier than what their wives endure at home. Let's also consider the seasonal dimensions of these hierarchical structures. In summer, when the weather is mild and the cold is not so extreme, the difference between the rich and the poor is not so significant. Everyone is sleeping better, everyone is facing fewer difficulties, and the level of comfort has also been greatly reduced. But winter magnifies all the advantages and disadvantages. When the temperature drops below -30 degrees, extra blankets for this wealthy family are very important. The thin walls of this poor family became unbearable, not just uncomfortable. These seasonal fluctuations imply that during the most difficult months for survival, the social hierarchy may be the most prominent and significant, which reinforces the importance of the community support system that helps balance these inequalities. The last aspect worth exploring is the issue of ambition and social mobility. Children growing up in poor families are acutely aware that some of their peers sleep warmer, eat better and face fewer difficulties. This awareness can inspire ambition and the desire to improve one's situation through trade, through cooperation with expeditions, and through extraordinary success in agriculture or animal husbandry. The comfortable gradient, precisely because it is visible but not overwhelming, creates longing rather than despair. Young people can realistically imagine getting a better environment, and many have achieved this through hard work and opportunities. Especially the mountaineering economy has provided unprecedented opportunities for social progress. Skilled mountaineers and organizers can accumulate more wealth than traditional paths can offer. This social mobility means that sleep arrangements may change throughout one's life. A person may remember the cold and hard childhood nights spent in a small and well-ventilated house, and then feel relatively comfortable if their efforts succeed